Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Corsair 5000T, which is T for turbo. Now, I don't really know what the T stands for, I'll be honest. It's the iCue 5000T RGB, which is essentially a upgraded and very expensive version of Corsair's 5000D case that I reviewed previously, or did a video on. I went into a lot of depth on that case, and I think I installed 12 fans in it and a large rad, and I also tested it with just 2 fans, 2 front fans and a radiator. And in this setup, what I'm doing currently is I'm using an NZXT Kraken Z73 on the top and 3 ML120 RGB Elite fans on the front. Now this case is interesting for a number of different reasons. First of all, it is £349 £349 I think, and about $400, which is very expensive for a PC case. It's a lot of money to spend on a case which doesn't have that much at first glance. It is, however, very interesting potentially. Like the 5000D, it's multi-capable, so you can mount fans on the front, on the top, and at the rear behind this cable hiding bracket. It also has the ability to have 3 SSDs mounting in trays on the rear, and you can mount on the back of the plate that goes on the back of this area here. Now you also notice that there's a Psu Shroud. You have 2 drive bays here for hard disk drives that's removable. There's also a plate that can go in the front that can be removed and moved around as well, so there's plenty of flexibility there. You have the potential for a front mounted rad 360mm or side mounted or top mounted, and you can do top and side or top and front, but you can't do top and side together, so you've got 2, but you can mount 2 360mm rads in here. Obviously, potentially liquid cooled systems, custom loop system might be the most logical build to do. As standard, it also comes with LL120s, so you get 3 LL120s mounted in the front, and these are some of the nicer looking fans from Corsair. Unfortunately, they haven't gone for QR120s, and they do have a horrible sticker on the rear, which you will see because they are mounted as intake fans as standard. But as you've seen, I've swapped them out for the ML120 RGB Elite, which Corsair wanted me to do to include in the video to talk about these, but I'm thinking about doing a separate video on them as well, because they are interesting, because they're essentially a mix of Corsair's ML120 fans with Corsair's Vortex airflow air guide fans, which they included in the previous 5000D. So those fans were designed to focus airflow with a backplate on them that essentially funnels airflow, so they're really good for like static pressure. They also have a higher RPM and better airflow for things like radiators, so they're ideal mounted on this 360mm radiator, for example. So they're potentially interesting. Also, at first glance you won't notice it, and you probably won't notice it until I throw in some B-roll or you see the main video, but there are RGB lighting strips buried, hidden away at the top here and down the sides on both sides, and that's pretty interesting in itself. The other thing that goes on at the back, excuse the mess of cables because I'm in the middle of building, I'll just get you a bit closer. But what you'll see is we have quite a mess of cables going on at the moment, but there are some hidden highlights here. So for example, this Commander Core XT here, this control box, is included as standard with the case, which is really interesting. As standard, it has the 3 LL120s plugged into it in terms of power and RGB, but you'll also notice that it has temperature sensors on both sides. So you have temperature sensors connected to it that you can obviously connect to devices on your PC. It also has this ID port, which I'm yet to work out what that is, and RGB connection. That RGB connection can be traced over here, where they basically have a small board which has 2 RGB connections on it that run into the top, and those are for the RGB strips that run down the front and side. So as standard, if you connect it up and don't do anything else, you don't install any other fans, you'll have RGB lighting on the LL120s and on the top and side. As you can see also, there's quite a lot of room to build back here. There is a mess of cables that I haven't tidied up yet. There's a lot of cables that you have to deal with coming out of that Commander Core and there's a lot of other considerations. But you'll see at the back that we have a fan mounting bracket, so you could side mount your fans or side mount the rad. Obviously you've got the cable hiding tray, so you can keep things nice and neat. So there's loads of different options in terms of what you can do with it. Now this is obviously an expensive case, and a very expensive case actually when you consider something like the Leonly Dynamic XL, which is about 250 I believe, so this is considerably more expensive and not as roomy as the 7000D, which I did a video on before, the 7000D Airflow. However, it does have a lot of potential. So you do have 3 trays for SSD mounting. You could put your SSDs here, or you could take them to the front, so you could take them off and mount them on the front at the bottom, so that's an option. 2 hard disk drives, and as I said, if you remove the commander core, which is default is connected here, you can also mount SSDs to the back of that tray, and that tray is removable, so you can access the back of the motherboard still to get to the back plate for CPU mounting. So it is quite an interesting case. You'll see that there's some really interesting sort of hidden highlights to it that aren't immediately obvious and will be actually quite difficult to put across in video. So obviously removable front panel, nothing new, held in place with magnets. But what is fascinating about this is it has a very thin mesh. So not only do you have this front mesh, but it also has really thin sort of textured mesh here. So I think this will be fantastic for blocking dust coming into your PC in 2 different ways. Be interesting to see if it impacts airflow, but I don't think so. You've got these nice triangular mesh effects on here, a really premium Corsair logo at the bottom, and then that fine mesh there. Normally you take this off and you have the LL120s under here, obviously, and in white, so it sticks with that white case. And maybe the black fans don't look quite as nice, but they are more powerful. They do deliver better airflow, and I believe they have a better range in terms of RPM, so they can go lower and higher in terms of max speed and minimum speed. So there's some things there. As I said, also hidden away in these sorts of sections is various different RGB lighting nodes, which I'll show later as well. So it's also quite mean looking. You'll notice also it doesn't have any panels on it. That's because I've removed them, because you can take them off with ease. So the build process is fairly straightforward. It also comes in a box that warns you that it's 15 kilos, so it's not a light PC by any means. And once you finish building in it, it's going to be even heavier. So my initial plans with this are, I'm going to try and do 2 things. One is to build it with these, just with 6 ML120 RGBs and the Kraken. And what I'm doing is I'm actually going to connect up the 3 fans that are on the rad directly to the Kraken, and then the 3 fans on the front will go into the commander core. I actually have 9 ML120 RGBs, but I'm going to do 2 videos. I'm going to split this build into 2 videos. One is just going to be a summary of all the different things that are cool about it, all the features of it, and a sort of a review of the case, and sort of a brief overview of how you could build in it as potential. Obviously, if you spent 350 quid on a case, you might be looking to save money on the other parts. So what's the airflow like in this setup? 3 intake and then exhausting through the top. I haven't got 1 fan on the rear or anything. Also some discussion there about, I have connected the fans from here to the pump head, where I'm going to, rather than to the commander core. The thought being that then the pump has control over the fan speed for the fans on the radiator, so it can keep the liquid cool, so it can improve the performance of the CPU in terms of the cooling there. So slightly different to what they probably want you to do, which is connect them all up to the commander core. Now, one thing that I think is probably frustrating and a bit daft, one downside to this case, is that it has the potential for 3 fans here, 3 fans here, 1 fan at the back, and then maybe another 3 here if you're crazy, which is what I am going to do in the long term. But the Commander Core XT only has connections for 6 fans, so you'd have to run 6 power and 6 RGB from those fans. So if I was connecting these up to the Commander Core, then that's all I could connect up, and I'd have to work out what I was going to do if I put a fan at the back as a minimum extra for RGB and power. Obviously you could go, you get a lighting node core with these fans with a triple back, so you could use that for the RGB, and I could use a fan header on the motherboard for the power. But it's not an ideal situation. I think it's a shame. Corsair included a PWM controller with a 5000D, which they haven't here, and I think the Commander Core XT is obviously an upgrade from that. Now the second stage of my build is going to be slightly different. I am going to use this case to help my friend upgrade his PC so that I can demonstrate a completely different setup. So once I get to that stage, I'm going to take out the NZXT Kraken and take off the fans from that, and we're going to replace it with the Corsair H150i Elite Capelix with the LCD display on it. I'm going to put those fans on that cooler because that currently has the previous ML120s, not the Elites. I think it's Pro RGB, and I'm going to side mount it instead. So I'll remove this bracket, I'll put the radiator on the fan tray, and I'll mount it on the side instead. So then I'll have 3 front fans, the rad with 3 fans on it, and then another 3 exhaust fans at the top, and then I'll probably try and mount a fan at the back. Although I've only got 9 fans, so I might end up with one random LL120 at the back, just because of course I didn't send quite enough fans for it. And I think it's an interesting insight into how you could potentially max out the case. And what's the difference in airflow? Is the airflow enough with 3 intake and 3 exhaust, or is it better with more? It's not going to be a perfect comparison because I'm also going to be swapping the CPU cooler out, simply for the fact of maximising the Corsair products that are in the case, getting the H150i Elite Capelix in there instead of a Kraken. I think if people are making cases, they probably want to use the same parts, especially if you've got a Corsair build, because they do very good products. I really like the Kraken Z73 though, and I had it to hand and spare, so I thought it would be interesting to show how you can use this but still use Corsair fans on it instead of NZXT fans, and connect them directly to the CPU pump to then allow for better cooling of the CPU. So lots of insights into the case and the build process. I'm obviously going to go into a lot more depth in the video. I'm thinking of doing 2 videos, one which was basically a short features and guide of the case and all the things that I found along the way building, and then a second one which will be an in-depth video on how to build in the case and what I did and all the steps of it, which is similar to what I did with the 5000D. But essentially, if you've watched the 5000D video, you'll know what's going on with the 5000T, because the main difference is the RGB lighting at the front and the top, and that's about it really. Oh, and the inclusion of the Commander Core. It's basically the same case, just upgraded and improved. And that's no bad thing, because the 5000D was one of my favourite cases to build in. It was very easy to build in, it's a very nice looking case, it's very intelligently laid out, and it's very customisable in terms of what you can do with it. The other thing that I probably will do is, or at least mention, is they've got their vertical mounting bracket here again. So you can vertically mount your GPU, but I think it'll suffer from the same problems as it did in the 5000D, is that it'll be too close to the glass, which will then choke it, and it'll end up just getting too hot. So I'll point people to that other video. But this is kind of an insight into that, and I'll leave some clips to show you what it looks like when I've finished. But I also recommend checking out those videos to see a bit more in-depth look of it. I just thought you'd be interested to sort of see the thought process that gone into this. I spent last night about 3 hours taking this case out and capturing all the different elements of it on camera, so ready for these videos, and then just installing those fans. And today I'm going to strip down my other machine in order to build in it. So here you can see the Lian Li Air Mini, which is the case that I built in recently. I've only just recently done this, and I've been using it as my main machine for the last week or so. And I'm going to use basically everything that's in there, apart from the fans, in the new case. And you can see the size difference just between the Mini and the thing. It's absolutely gargantuan. I think that this behind the scenes video and this clip probably won't even do it justice. The Air Mini is a very good high quality case, and I enjoyed building in it despite its tiny stature. The Corsair 5000T by comparison is gargantuan, and obviously has room for a lot more fans, although there's no intake fans at the bottom. One of the things I like about this Lian Li design is you have intake fans at the bottom, so you've got air blowing straight onto the GPU, and obviously from the front as well, and then plenty of room for exhaust at the top. And again, I've side mounted the rad, so it's going to be basically the same layout in here as it will be in there eventually. The initial plan is to do the build with a lot less fans, but this is going to be the process for that. I've got to take my case apart and rebuild it again. But my eventual plan is to give this CPU CPU, motherboard, RAM set up to my friend, upgrade him, swap his PC out for something else, and then build in another case, because that's what I'm doing in 2022, is building PCs for people and then passing them on. And also obviously capturing a lot of footage and doing a lot of videos to go along with it. And this is the final product, as you can see. I'm just going to leave a couple of clips here to show you basically what it looks like with the various lighting things changing. Obviously I'd recommend checking out the full build guide, in which I'll include all sorts of information on things like the benchmark tests between the two different layouts, and go into a bit of depth on things like this RGB lighting, the various effects that you can get out of the lighting strips and the fans. But what you'll see is this is a quite interesting case with a lot of potential for different build layouts and highlights, and very few negatives. I actually liked quite a few different things about it. For example, being able to lay out your fans in a nice variety of ways, but also have a lot of places to hide the various cables away, tuck them out of sight, neaten things up nicely. There are, however, some drawbacks. I found, for example, that it was a bit difficult to hide the cables at the back of the case and to be able to close the door on it, so I'd recommend checking out the other videos that I've done just to demonstrate that. I found it a lot easier with the 5000D, so it's not without its negatives, but it is a very nice looking case with a lot of features and highlights and a lot of intelligent thought that's gone into the overall build. However, there are some small complaints that I had. If you have this full fan layout with a rad setup, then you really can't use the HDD cage at the bottom of the case, and I think it's this sort of in-depth build process that I've gone through that's helped me discover this, because on the face of it, it looks like you should be able to install multiple SSDs and multiple hard drives, but actually if you're going all in on fans and radiators, you actually can't use that tray. And if you have a bigger power supply unit, it becomes problematic in where to put the tray and also where to put your cables. So you really need to sort of look in depth and consider what you're building in. However, if you're using a motherboard with just NVMe drives and you want multiple fans and you're not bothered about SSDs or hard disk drives, then this is a brilliant case and a great option. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.